Hello, hello, everyone. Welcome to the DBA Fundamentals virtual group. This is actually, it's our second presentation of 2020. Woo-hoo, past another year. We're here today with Tim Radney, and he's going to speak on Azure data security. And I'm really excited. We're moving to the cloud ourselves, so I've really been looking forward to this one. Before we get into that, there's a little bit of housekeeping I'll go over, and then I'll turn it over to him. This slide has quite a bit of information. Of course, the speaker's name and all that, which you'll see on his presentation slide too, but all of our names also in the top right-hand corner. All of the organizers for this group, Steve, Shane, Warwick, Kevin, and I. In fact, most of us are here today, so you can say hi. Those are our Twitter handles. You can also reach us all together on Twitter at DBAFun. That is the DBA Fundamentals virtual group Twitter account, and we all have access to watching that. You can check us out online at dbafun.org, and that has a list of all of our upcoming presentations. I hope you receive our email. I try to get it out every week. Sometimes it's not every single week, but at least on the weeks that we do presentations, I send it out, and it has a list of all the upcoming for the year and such at the bottom. So if you're not on that, go to dbafun.org or pass.org and make sure that we're in your list of virtual groups, and you'll get that email too. You can also check us out on Slack. There's a great SQL community on Slack, and the DBA Fundamentals virtual group actually has a whole channel to ourselves, so we can, talk to our heart's content in there. And you can also check us out on LinkedIn. It's linkedin.com/groups/6960914. We can't get a nice URL for that one, but that's okay. LinkedIn, that's what they're going to do. So there's a lot of discussions and articles, and it's a great way of growing your network, which we all think of at the beginning of the year anyway, so that's perfect. Next, perfect. We are here today because of sponsors, and our first sponsor is CenturyOne. They have an amazing product. I love going on the website for information. It is CenturyOne.com, and they have blogs. They also have SQLperformance.com. Both of those have a lot of helpful articles, and they actually have been around long enough and have enough gurus that they have a lot of resources. So rather than listing them all here, there's one web page that lists a whole bunch. That's CenturyOne.com/resources. And that's going to give you links to, it's just a whole bunch of links to all kinds of other stuff. So definitely check that out. They also offer free query tuning advice and free downloads. So the answers.sqlperformance.com, and you can go to CenturyOne.com/trial for their free software on a trial basis. And you can also get their free Plan Explorer. It actually is a plugin for the Management Studio, and it is phenomenal. I love looking at my execution plans through the tool because it really has a lot of visuals that help out a little more than just a standard execution plan visual in Management Studio. So definitely check them out. Our second sponsor is DBWatch, and they have a complete solution for administration, monitoring, performance tuning, security, and license management. It's an all-in-one bundle. And it's actually not just for SQL Server, it's also Oracle and other platforms. So definitely check them out. They have a lot of articles too, blog.dbwatch.com. I have gone there several times and just gotten an answer to my question or what have you. So definitely check them out. And they also have free trials. So you can try it out when you're looking for something to use. Oops, let me see if I can go back a slide here. Nope. Oh, well, I can go this way. Okay, so upcoming virtual groups. We are a member of PASS, and it's an overarching organization, but they have a lot of virtual groups. So this just kind of gives you an idea of all of them, from database administration to BI, to the cloud, hybrid, security, even professional development, and women in technology. There's just a whole lot. And of course, multiple languages in there too. So if anything you're looking for, PASS probably has a virtual group about it, and they have sessions just like this one. So you'll be able to connect with other people in the community and get some free learning. Another thing PASS does is they have SQL Saturdays, and this is a great way of, again, broadening out your network and growing your network. you'll get to meet a whole lot of people in the data field of some kind, whether it's BI or database administration or even CIOs. So it's just a great way of networking. And again, you get to meet a lot of people, and it's a free event, except for lunch. Some of them can have enough sponsors, some of them don't have enough sponsors, but other than lunch, it's a completely free event, and it's amazing. All right, I'm going to turn it over to Tim. Make you presenter.
Well, thank you, Glenda. All right, so I need to now show my screen again. All right, you should see a PowerPoint.
Yes, we do. Yep.
Excellent, excellent. So you did a fantastic job kind of talking about CenturyOne. I did want to mention a couple of other things with the Plan Explorer, which you said was free. It is absolutely free. Doesn't even require an email address. Jonathan Cahias came out with a updated Pluralsight course for how to use the Plan Explorer. So he goes through actually walking you through leveraging that to find your worst queries and tuning those. So lots of good stuff there. And also, if you just do a Google Bing search for CenturyOne ebooks, they have a lot of their CenturyOne or SQL performance articles kind of recapped and put together in a ebook form for you to go through and kind of digest. And so free ebooks, and then with the Pluralsight, training to sit there and show you how to leverage the Plan Explorer to the best of your ability. So neat stuff. All right, so this session is Azure Data Security. Anytime I've worked with a client or I've done training courses on anything related to Azure, whether it be virtual machines, SQL database, managed instance, elastic pools, all of those, security is at the forefront of the discussion. People start wigging out when they think about moving data assets from on-premises into the cloud. And there's a lot of tools, some things that we can leverage to help kind of secure and lock down our environments a little bit better. So we're going to talk about some of those. But the kind of stepping through introduction, let me get my slide moving. So I am with SQL Skills. I get to work with an incredible team, Paul Randall, Kimberly Tripp Randall, Jonathan Cahias, known as SQL Pool Boy, Aaron Stellato. We do consulting, we do training, we have in-person training events, live online training, tons of courses out on Pluralsight. Kind of the takeaway here, if you're not a SQL Skills insider, Paul sends out a newsletter every couple of weeks. That newsletter contains some interesting tidbit that we've encountered, whether it be working with a client or helping someone out through a forum. We also have an insider video where we're showing some new neat thing that we've come up with, or kind of answering questions that have popped up on how to do certain things. So it's not a markety, spammy newsletter. It's kind of cool tidbits. So I encourage you to sign up. I mentioned classes. Our in-person classes are coming up in April and May in Chicago. We have 2 weeks of performance tuning. Jonathan's doing an event on clustering and availability groups. I have a 2-day session on reporting, so administering SQL Server reporting services, upgrades, Power BI, kind of migrating there, as well as a 4-day class on Azure. So if you're interested in Azure, you're looking to maybe start moving and need more help or deeper knowledge on migrations and upgrades and tuning and all of that, sign up for the 4-day class. I mentioned Pluralsight. No obligation here. Send Paul an email at paul@sqlskills.com. He'll send you a code for a 30-day trial of all the SQL Skills content, which is over 188 hours. So rather
All right, Tim, I don't hear you anymore. Oh, he just went offline. I'm sure he'll be back on. It happens from time to time. I'll go through this a little bit. So I know that he gave you the information about emailing Paul. The Pluralsight stuff is an awesome way of training. So, and their group does several trainings. So I know he's mentioning here, this isn't my slide deck, sorry, but he's mentioning here different courses that the team puts on. I will let you know also in the next couple of months, we actually have several of them who are doing sessions for us. In fact, Jonathan's is, I believe, in like 4 weeks or something like that. So Jonathan Johannes, he just mentioned. So definitely check out our list of sessions. That will be very, very helpful. It's amazing how his slide deck is still up, but he's offline. Little technical difficulties, but I'm sure he'll be back on in just a moment. I don't have my question pane pulled out here.
I will say he mentioned the SQL Skills Insider newsletter. I received that, and as well as the little tips and tidbits and kind of experiences they see in SQL Server. Paul does a really good review of what he's currently reading, which is a great recommendation of books if you want to check them out.
Oh, awesome, awesome. I do like reading their stuff and what they write, because you're right, he's really great at speaking about stuff.
They're used to your configuration.
Oh,
I
just heard a little bit. Oh, he's back on. I told you to be back.
So what happened?
I don't know. You were mentioned offline, but your slide deck never actually disappeared. So I don't know.
So where did voice cut out?
The Pluralsight is where you had
wow.
just, I believe you had just finished that one. So
here, wow.
yeah, so we covered that. So you can move on to the next.
All right, so I was just, for this, I just said, hey, any questions come up, email me, tim@sqlskills.com. You can also ask questions in the chat, and we'll try to get to those. Also, you can reach out to me directly on Twitter @tradney. The little trivia about Tim, I'm into aquaponics, so I have, tilapia that I'm growing. I have a fairly large garden size of a soccer field, football field, and then I raise chickens for the eggs. All right, so to get started here in the overview, I need to lay a foundation of what is the platform as a service, so we'll talk about that. We'll jump into compliance. Most organizations these days are regulated by some government entity, whether you're United States or somewhere else in the world. There's some government that's trying to tell you, how to run your business and how to protect data and all those good things. So we'll cover a little bit of that. We'll talk about backups. I mean, that is, from a data security aspect, that's super critical, right? I mean, we've seen all the encryption and ransomware stuff. People had good solid backups that were offsite. They could recover much more easily than paying ransoms. We'll talk about privacy and data protection features and functionality that exist to help us kind of obfuscate data and things. One of my favorite aspects is the threat and vulnerability protection. Before joining SQL Skills, I managed the production application support team, file transfer, app support. I transitioned over to information security for about 6 months to help with some data projects over there, and get to see a lot into the whole InfoSec environment. So seeing what Microsoft is providing in that space is really, really cool. So we'll talk about that. And then we'll just jump into some demos and show as many of the security features as we have time. So your overall platform as a service, this is set up to allow organizations and customers to really focus on their business and their applications and growing their business and not having to worry about hardware, application installation. I mean, all that's kind of handled for you. There's still some configuration that you need to do from networking and interfaces and things, but for the most part, all the data center activities, you're not having to really spend a lot of time on. So full support for building, deploying, testing, and updating your applications. Certain aspects in the platform as a service have auto scale, and we're starting to see this even in the SQL PaaS environment with SQL Database with the serverless configuration. So now it can scale up, scale down as workload demands. But think about like applications, web service. We just had the Super Bowl here in the United States. The NFL, big, their big con was this weekend, where everybody dressed up in jerseys and stuff, their role play. And there was a big game and there was a lot of commercials. So if anyone in that commercial had a website to come check out for discounts and more products, they should have seen a massive influx of traffic. So if they had auto scale enabled, many more web servers could ramp up to handle that load, and they could scale back down. So that's a huge benefit of a platform as a service, because on premises, you have to have all that infrastructure already there. You have to have implemented that technology, and you're incurring the costs on the infrastructure, whether you're using it or not. So Azure kind of helps there. Lots of integrated stuff for health monitoring, for load balancing. You have predictable performance and pricing. You kind of know the compute that you're paying for. So I'm going to sign up for X amount of vCore or memory storage. You know what you're getting. You know what the throughput and the bandwidth is for those. And it's, in many cases, a pay-as-you-go. There are opportunities to prepay, where you can purchase a full year, 2 years, 3 years, and save lots of money. I mentioned the compliance. We're going to dive into that a little bit more. And it's cloud, so geographically distributed development teams can all work together cohesively, looking at the same data, because it's all cloud-based. And then what really sets Azure apart is these pre-coded application components. So think of search, think of Azure Active Directory, some of the security components. They're all built in and they're integrated, versus if you just went and paid for infrastructure as a service with another provider, you're having to integrate over to Office 365 and SharePoint and other systems. In the Microsoft ecosystem, hey, it's all already there. So where does SQL Server fit into this? Well, your Azure SQL database, your Elastic pools, your managed instance, they're all built on that platform as a service. So the overall general features, functionality that are built into the PaaS environment, you get to take advantage of. So compliance. Microsoft has spent a lot of money, a lot of time, a lot of resources to achieve their aspect, the components that they're in charge of. So think of data center security, think of handling of hard drives, of encrypting the network between different components, all of that you would be responsible for on premises within your data center. Since they are the data center, they've taken that burden to be able to achieve the compliance. Now, the consumers, you and I that are implementing this for companies, or we work for a company, we're still going to have our pieces to that. If you take a look at the Azure Trust Center, Microsoft has put together different matrix that basically Excel spreadsheets that list out the compliance regulations. So let's talk about PCI. So the payment card holder industry, you're dealing with card holder data. If you process and you need to achieve a level of PCI compliance, there's a tremendous amount of regulation of different requirements. I forget the actual percentage, but it's something like 60 some odd % of that Microsoft takes care of, because it's all related to the infrastructure. There's still 30+% that the consumer is responsible for. That spreadsheet kind of breaks those things out, and it says if it's a shared responsibility, a Microsoft responsibility, or a consumer responsibility. And in most of the cases for PCI, the consumer responsibility is defining policies and procedures. So paperwork, you need to define how you handle certain things. And then other aspects, such as masking sensitive data, such as card holder, the 16-digit number, the PIN, those pieces of information. And then it will list out, oh, well, you have dynamic data masking, you have row level security, you have TDE, you have TLS to encrypt in motion, all of those things that you could take advantage of. So that's really cool. Now, how much of that is a DBA's responsibility versus a compliance department to then come back and kind of dictate to the DBA team that we need to implement certain tools? But it's still fun and interesting for the data professionals to take a look at this and kind of geek out and see, what could we, since we are the data stewards, do to better protect our environment, or at least start preparing and getting ready. Also to make the business case of upgrading to at least SQL Server 2016 to take advantage of some of these solutions. All right, backups. Being a production DBA for many, many, many years, backups are very important to me. That was one of the things when I managed a DBA team that there were only a couple of fireable offenses. One was you made a big change and we didn't have backups that we could recover from. So backups were like the top thing. If we had jobs fail and retention was becoming an issue, we address that before anything else. The other is you make a mistake and try to cover it up, right? So don't be that person. Admit, we fix it. We can always recover from backup, and then we'll blame the network. But when I started working with Azure, one of the first things I looked at was, well, how do I handle backup and recovery? And I quickly learned that you're not responsible for backups. Backups are handled for you by Microsoft. And so there's fulls being taken, differentials being taken, log backups being taken, very frequent, and they are stored securely. And we as the customer can't even get to the managed backup files. They are locked down, they are secure, and it's being managed. So that's great from a compliance perspective, that we know they're there. We can recover to a point in time within our retention period, which for your general purpose, business critical, standard premium tiers and managed instance, you can get up to 35 days backup retention. And if you need longer than that, there's the long-term retention vault that can take you up to 10 years. So pretty much anyone's backup requirements can be met. So if you need more than 35 days, you can do that. Managed instance does allow you to do copy-only backups. So now you can still manage a certain requirement, or if you need monthly snapshots, weekly, whatever, you can do a copy-only, store that on blob storage, name it and catalog it however that you want. But this is all happening behind the scenes. And most cases with the PAS restore, those databases are going to restore to a new name. So then you can either recover your data, or you can rename the bad database to something else, rename the restored copy to the production name. But from a security aspect, they're backed up, they're encrypted, they're secure. We don't really have to be overly concerned there. Whereas on premises, a big issue that I see is we're backing up without TDE or without backup encryption to a network appliance that many other people have access to. And anyone that has that access could grab that backup file, restore it to a developer edition, and see all the data. So I've never understood why that's an acceptable risk with many large organizations versus backing up with encryption. Oh, if we back up with encryption, it messes up our deduplication. So what's more important, secured backups or saving space on fairly inexpensive, slower storage that you put backups on? But that's a fight for another day. Just know from a backup perspective, it's handled for you. They're secure. You get to handle the restores. All right, what about privacy and data protection? We have this neat feature called dynamic data masking. If you've ever had to mask data prior to leveraging something like this, it was rather difficult. Let's say we had a phone number or account number, email address, social security number, things like that, that an application's pulling back. And it's pulling back the full record, the full data. And maybe for a handful of users, they need to see the full social security number. But for 95% of the other users consuming this application, there's no business reason that they're seeing social security number on the screen, and substitute social security number with any other sensitive data. And I see that a lot of third-party, what they call COTS applications. On the screen, there's a lot of data, and most of the data for that user's business function, they don't really need to see it. So in that case, we can mask that data using dynamic data masking. It's simply a filter that's applied. So you go and choose that this column I want to mask, choose the masking function, and then you list which users are excluded from the masking rule, which is pretty neat. So you're applying a masking rule. It applies to everyone except administrators, and then those who you deem are unmasked. Without dynamic data masking, to do that, you're duplicating the data, and then you're having a different set of rules depending on who the user is, and it gets really complicated. And you're taking up a lot more space. With dynamic data masking, there's no physical change to the data. There's really no reason that an application vendor could say that we've broken their data, because it's simply changing how the data appears in the result set. So it's not breaking joins, it's not doing any of that. So it's a really neat feature. Now, if you go out and you Google Bing and you look up dynamic data masking, there's probably some blog posts out there that talk about how it's more of a privacy feature, not a security feature, and that there's scenarios that this may not work that well. Well, let's address those. I mentioned an application. So think of reporting services, an application. In those situations, the user's probably not able to query based upon the column of data that you're filtering on. So let's say I'm looking up in this application where last name equals Radney, and it's showing salary, or it's showing social security number. It's showing something that they shouldn't see. In that application, I can't query on social security number or salary number. But if I had Management Studio, then I could query payroll, or the employee table where last name equals Radney, and do a select star, and I see that there's a salary column, and maybe it's all X's because it's masked. Well, it's all X's, so let's query payroll table where last name equals Radney and salary greater than $10 an hour. It comes back and I see Radney in a result set, greater than $12. I still see it. Greater than $15, it's no longer there. Okay, greater than 12, less than 1450. It's there. All right, so now I know it's less. It's between a range. So you could still kind of circumvent the masking. I never see the unmasked value, but I can narrow it down. This isn't built kind of for that. If you can query based on that range, then it's probably some data that the end user really should be seeing within their application. But for the most part, where I've seen this implemented is applications or reports where the data is returned and there's not a business justification for that data being there for a bulk of the users. So we're going to mask it and then only have it unmasked for the users that truly need to see the data. And for that, it works extremely well. You get the checkbox for the compliance and all the regulatory stuff that you are doing your best to limit access to the sensitive data. So let's take that a step further. Row level security. Now, we don't want anyone other than a handful of users to be able to see employee data. So I worked for a bank. A lot of our customers or employees were customers of the bank. So you have that kind of itch of maybe you want to look up and see what a coworker makes or what somebody else in the company makes. And they shouldn't be able to do that. Only maybe human resources or branch managers, somebody in an elevated job description, elevated pay grade, should be able to assist employees with their financial information. So in this case, we want to limit, if employee status equals true, that only HR and people of a certain job code or in a certain Active Directory group can view that data. So if you're not in that group, then you go to look up Radney. You're not going to see Tim Radney, who's an employee. You may see Jeff Radney, who is just a customer. So that allows the feature functionality there is row level security. So based upon your user rights assignment, your Active Directory group or your some role determines whether or not you're able to see that data. And again, this is just access restriction logic. There's no actual change of data in the database. So that one's pretty neat, and that's one that I'll be able to demo for you. All right, transparent data encryption. This has been around since SQL Server 2008. For your SQL database, TDE is enabled by default. So it's already on. You can turn it off if you want to, but with modern processors and everything, the overhead for TDE is so insignificant that Microsoft decided, hey, it's going to be on by default, just out of the box for all Azure SQL database. We now have the ability to bring your own key, and you can bring your own key for Azure SQL Database and Manage Instance. So this way you can manage your own key rotation if you'd like. There is Azure Key Vault integration. So for those of you who have started working with encryption, whether it be backup encryption, whether it be TDE encryption, you know that key management is really, really important, because if you back up, and you encrypt that backup, and then you need to restore somewhere else, and you don't have the key to restore the certificate, then you can't decrypt the database. Similar with TDE encrypted, because when you encrypt an instance with TDE, your backups are also encrypted. So you need that key in order to restore. So key management is super, super important. And being able to leverage the Azure Key Vault is pretty good. There's also other key managers that you can take advantage of. Always encrypted. This one is really, really cool and sets SQL Server apart from pretty much all other competitors. And this is now allowing us to encrypt sensitive data within the database itself. So TDE got you encryption at rest. But if I was able to query the database, so let's say a sideways penetration attack, gain control of a server that had firewall access to the database, then I could still query that human resources table. I could query anything and see the data. With always encrypted, I'm now able to encrypt social security number, email address, account number, whatever information that is deemed sensitive in your organization. I can encrypt this within the storage engine. So unless you have the encryption key, you're not able to see that plain text data. This includes DBAs. So if there is data that is that sensitive, credit card numbers, HIPAA, healthcare information, things like that, there's no reason for a DBA to see somebody's status of disease and social security number and salary ranges. So that information can be encrypted, and only the HR department or whomever has the encryption key to decrypt that information. So that's cool. And there are somewhat challenges here where people don't need to go crazy and just start encrypting everything. There's performance overhead from inserts, it's having to decrypt. So there's performance overhead. There's also selectivity. So if you're using, we'll get to the next slide. So randomized and deterministic. So if you're randomized, then everything is unique. So even if I'm storing RADME 100 times, that's 100 different values, versus deterministic, where RADME is going to look to be the same information. So it's encrypted and going to have the same result each time. So depending on what your need is and how your application is going to perform, and all of that will determine your encryption type, and then you need to fully vet before just turning this on. But for that really sensitive data, here is a very good option for you to protect it even further. All right, data classification and or data discovery and classification. This is not like new, just like we talked about dynamic data masking that came out in Azure SQL Database, 2015 in the box version, so SQL Server 2016. We gained dynamic data masking, row level security, always encrypted. And I forget the version of SQL Server Management Studio is 17.5 maybe, so long time ago for Management Studio. It introduced data discovery and classification, and we've had that in Azure as well. So what this does is it allows you to run a utility that's going to go through and look at the metadata, basically your column types and links and things like that, and determine, could this store sensitive data, such as if you have a column named Social Security number or SSN, and guess what? It's storing the length of numbers for a Social Security number. Then it's going to flag it, hey, this could potentially be sensitive data. And it allows you to go and determine, yes, it is, or no, it's not, and put that label on it. Now you can report off of that. So we've gone through this vendor database and we've classified and we've deemed that these columns do not contain any sensitive data. These columns do. So what are we going to do now? we going to audit on those? Are we going to encrypt those? Are we going to mask those? It gives you a place to start. And then you can clean the information up and make it much more valid. And then run reports based off of that. And you can export those into Excel, provide them to examiners and auditors and business continuity people or whoever you need to. But it gives us a starting point. And yeah, I mean, you can run it as often as you want, and clean it up. And it's maturing. So there's, I forget which versions, whether you could create custom classifications and custom tags. I know in the Azure product you could, and there was for the Management Studio, and now also I think with the new tool, Azure Data Studio, we've seen additional improvements. So definitely something to take a look at. All right, what about threat and vulnerability protection? So your threat detection. In the Azure portal, there's a whole new security dashboard. Before, as these tools were and features were there, you'd have to go into that asset and go into the security options and look to see the different tools for masking and vulnerability assessments, your classification. Now there's an entire security pane. So one dashboard you can go to and look for your entire ecosystem for your Azure subscriptions and see basically what your security threat score is. Where are the recommendations, where are you lacking, where are areas that you may need to turn some things on. Now your threat detection, to me, this is one of the coolest features, and from a data professional perspective, it's kind of a gray area. Are we responsible for this, or is it your information security department? And I say yes. Everyone is responsible for protection. It's just like when, if you've ever been out on like a gun range, I do a lot of volunteer work with the Boy Scouts, and that's part of the program. And anyone is allowed to yell out ceasefire. If someone sees anything that could cause harm, anyone can shut down the assembly line, right? I mean, just like when the automobile manufacturers and things, they all have that pulley, the trains that have the cable that you can pull to set the brakes. We're all responsible. We all have a place in it. And you data professionals, even more so, with making sure that we're protecting and we're looking out for the security of our environment. I mean, because what are people trying to get access to when they're trying to break in and hack? Data, the stuff that we're there to protect. So here with the threat detection, we can turn this on. It's really, really inexpensive. Last time I looked, it was $15 per server. So per Azure SQL server, or per Azure SQL database server, per managed instance. So lots of databases, not per database, it's per instance or grouping of those. And what it's doing is it's looking for anomalies. So it's determining and kind of recording, keeping a baseline and what our normal activity is. And then anything that's outside of that, you can bubble up as an alert. And with that alert, it's informational. Hey, here's what we're seeing. And if it's, in most cases, if it's something that they've seen before, that here's what you can do to mitigate that, you're going to get a report that tells you how to address that, what you can do to go and protect yourself. So what are some examples? Let's say that Jonathan on my team, on a daily basis, he's pulling back about 2 gigabytes of data from our customer table, our customer database, where we log all of our project work and incidents and all of that information. And he's usually always coming from an IP address down in Florida. It changes on occasion from his service provider, but we know it's still coming from that region in Florida. Now all of a sudden, Jonathan's username and password's logging in, but it's coming from Brazil. And now it's pulling 20 gigabytes of data. Well, do you want to know about that? Is that an anomaly? Is that any rate of concern? Is that problematic? Well, it depends. Is Jonathan working with a new vendor down in Brazil to build us a new environment? Or is he still down in Tampa logging in, pulling his 2 gig, but his account's also being used somewhere else? That's something that you probably want to investigate. User credentials from a different IP address, accessing a different range of data, a different amount of data. If you think back through Target, TJ Maxx, Home Depot, Equifax, Sony, I mean, all of those massive data breaches was large sums of data trickling out, pretty high rate of speed, that had people either had the monitoring or reacted to the monitoring, could have saved a lot of reputational loss. And this is something that Microsoft actually built for their internal systems that they've been using, that they opened up for external, for their customers to also take advantage of. So who's going to respond? Well, if the DBA gets notification and they're able to quickly investigate, we're first line of defense. We can disable that account. We can start trying to triage what all was accessed, notify the SOC, Security Operations Center, whomever. They can also get the same alerts and respond, try to start correlating how this came through the firewall. I mean, all of that. So it's a team effort, but it's super, super cool. And you can view all of this through the Azure portal. Your next thing is vulnerability assessment. It's getting really difficult to find people that have not been part of some type of vulnerability assessment, or that their organization does regular scans of their entire system. So whether it be monthly scans, quarterly scans, they get a report from information security that says, hey, all of these patches need to be applied to your SQL Server instances, to your operating systems, to whatever, and even your iPhones and Androids if you're accessing corporate email, telling you, hey, you're behind, you need to patch. Most organizations leverage tools like Qualys and others, and before a server can go into production, they have to mitigate and be fully patched. What about from a database perspective? So it's one thing to get it for an instance, but what about database? So Microsoft has this vulnerability assessment in your Azure SQL database. It's a service. You can get a weekly scan. I've actually got a copy of a report. So my reports, they run every Sunday, and I just took a screenshot. So every Sunday I get a notification. I had 5 databases scanned. There's 32 total failing checks, 218 passed. So I haven't done the math. So what does that report? Is it a passing grade, at least 70%? So I'm good, right? Probably not. But I purposely keep a somewhat bad environment so I can illustrate how this looks. So my server RADNI was scanned, like I said, the 5 databases. And if I go and I look through these, most of those, at least 5 of those findings are going to be, hey, we found some sensitive data that's not masked or encrypted. You don't have certain things enabled. You haven't run or you have a sysadmin or DBO type user on a system account that should be locked down. Certain things like that. And I could go in and look at the details on any one of these and then approve that. So, okay, yes, I know you're flagging this as needs to be masked, but it's really not an account number. It's just a random number. It's an identity column or something else. So you can approve that baseline, which is very nice. So that's something that sets it apart, is we're going to approve something that was in the vulnerability assessment. And this is, you can do this within the SQL Server Management Studio tool. So it's built into Management Studio that you can run the vulnerability assessment. You can approve as part of the baseline. So the next time you run the report, you're not going to get all these false positives. So that is something that's really rich with this, is I have automated scans with my Azure databases. I could approve my baseline so that I'm not ignoring it like I am now. So now, because it's just for demonstration purposes, I get the report, I'm not really looking at it. But if it was a production system, and there's no way I'm going to have 30-something vulnerabilities, just lingering week after week. I'm going to go and approve baseline, or I'm going to mitigate and fix the problem. So I have 0, and then the next week, if it pops up and says I have 5, what is this new thing? Was something new detected? Was there a vulnerability? It's actionable information, which is pretty awesome to have that, and it's built in to your products, Management Studio and the Azure portal. And I would dare say I haven't looked at the Azure Data Studio recently, I would assume vulnerability assessment's probably there as well. All right, what about some other security features? Of course, your Azure Active Directory integration. I mean, it's there, it's built in. Azure AD authentication into Azure SQL database, your managed instances, all of that. You can synchronize from on-premise to Azure using a tool like Azure AD Connect, where it's just going to sync. It's a one-way, so your on-premises will go up to the cloud. You can still have separate accounts in the cloud. They're not going to sync back down. And what's really interesting and slick is the multi-factor authentication. So you may not have it on premises, or you may be leveraging something like Okta or something for two-factor. If you move to Azure Active Directory, multi-factor is built in. It's pretty, step through the wizard, click, configure a few things, boom, you've got multi-factor. So now when somebody goes to log in, they're either going to get an email or a text message, with a code they have to enter to get into the system. That's awesome. It's so difficult to kind of break that multi-factor for someone to get unauthorized access. All right, your auditing, there's additional managed instance auditing. So database events, this is going to an audit log in your Azure storage account. So for compliance and regulatory information, any changes, any things that you've enabled to be audited are logged there. And then you can use things like Azure Analytics to go through and parse and report off of that. Or if you have your on-premises logging tool, maybe you're using Splunk or LogLogic or Sumo Logic or any one of those to kind of aggregate, you can just plug in and pull that out of Azure Analytics or the storage account into your own analytical program. So lots of capabilities there. And then TLS, your transport layer security, it's there, enable it, take advantage of it. There's no reason not to be encrypting your traffic between different devices. So demos, let's have some fun. Let's look at a few of these features. All right, let me just find my VM. All right, let's start with dynamic data masking. That one's kind of fun. So with dynamic data masking, this is where we can mask data. There's lots of built-in rules. If we wanted to look at the Azure portal, I go into a database. This is my AdventureWorks TR. I go to security, dynamic data masking, and we can see that there's already a lot of recommended fields to mask. So what's interesting though is it's prompting me to encrypt last name, first name. I mean, I get it, that's could be part of PII, personal identifiable information. If they can't see the first name, last name, then they don't know who the information belongs to. To me, that's kind of excessive. I'm looking more for account numbers and, this is a credit card ID and card type. I'm more interested in the card number. So for here, I could say add mask, but if for any of these, I go through and just say, add a mask and take a look at the formats, we can see there's default. So if it's a numeric value, be 0. If it's alphanumeric or letters, X's, so like email addresses could be all X's. Dates would default to January 1, 1900. Your credit card is going to mask all but the last 4. Email defaults to, you have the first letter in the @ and then everybody is a .com, regardless if you're .gov, .org, or .whoever. You can use a random number range or a custom string. So we're going to take a look at some of those. To show you how this works, we're going to do it in Management Studio, although we can also do it here in the portal. Just know in the Azure portal, if you were to go and say, okay, I want to add the mask to the last name, it's not actually added right now until I click Save. And then if I want to come in here and then I see some, and then I want to delete them, I would have to delete, discard, and then save. So I'm not actually going to do any of that. I'll just go back to my dashboard, say unsaved edits, go away. And let's take a look. To demo this, we're going to create a user called dynamic, our DDM user for dynamic data masking user. And we're going to grant this user access to select on a couple of tables. Those tables are person.email address, and person.product. So if I mask email with the default email masking rule, and then I'm going to execute as user DDM user, now we see those email addresses are all grayed out, or they're all X's. So we see the first initial and then everybody's a .com. Versus if I execute without that user, we can see full ken0@adventureworks.com. What if we change this to the default? Now it's just all X's. So which would you prefer? For aesthetics, doesn't really matter. The 4 X's, I mean, there's no doubt that this is masked. Could there be somebody that is actually txxxx@xxxx.com? Probably not. I don't know if that domain exists, but both of those are pretty good for masking. All right, what about a value? So we have a number value here, and we're going to say use a random. Now, before I query using the DDM user, let's take a look at that product table with the standard cost. And we can see our standard cost for the first whole bunch of records are $0. But if we query with DDM user, oh, did I actually? Yep, so our standard cost has values. So would this be a wise masking rule for all values using random, especially when it comes to numbers? If somebody were to query and they're actually looking up how much is this bearing ball and it's $9.59 per unit cost, and they're making business decisions off of that, when in fact it was actually $0 because it's probably an item that we no longer manufacture or for whatever reason, they could be making bad decisions off of masked data. So use caution when you're using random, especially with numbers or something that someone could take and it makes it look like it's a real value. Now, there may be cases where you want it to be random and still look like a business user type value, being real. But for the most part, my opinion, it's best to mask where if the user's looking at it, they kind of know it's bogus data. All right, let's grant unmask. So how do you remove a masking or masking rules from a user? Grant unmask to that user. And right now, there's not a way that I'm aware of to be able to unmask this user for just a certain masking rule. It's either the user has masking or they don't. So now if we query those two tables with that user, we see actual email address and our standard cost is back to zeros. How do you remove the unmask? Well, you revoke it. So revoke unmask to that user. All right, we had looked at the product table a couple of times. Probably no one paid attention to the product number, but we see product number here, AR-5381, BA-8327. What if we used a partial and we said we want to insert an XYZ? So now we have the first two letters, so partial 2, and then the last two. So AR XYZ 81. So XYZ all the way through the middle. So maybe you want to allow a partial amount of the value to display, so someone could make some kind of guesstimate, or the first two letters or first few letters mean something, but they don't need to see everything else. You can absolutely do that. You can get as creative as you want by using the partial value. How do you know what's masked? Well, we can query and see that if we look at sysmask columns and join over to the tables, we can see the table name, the column name is masked, is that value that you're looking for. So is masked equals 1, and then we're pulling back the function. And this is local. If I was in the Azure SQL database, I could go back to the Azure portal, refresh, and see the same ones show up. So how do you drop? You just alter the table, alter column, and drop the mask. And then I'm going to clean up and remove the user. So now if we come back and we query, we should not have any masked columns. All right, what about row level security? So we can change how the data is viewed in the result set to users. But what about limiting what they can actually see? So for that, I'm going to create 3 users, a boss, an employee 1 and 2. I'll create a table called sales. I'm just going to insert a few records, and then we'll query to see all of our data in the sales table. So we have salesperson 1, or employee 1 and employee 2, and we can see the different products and different values that they've sold. So we're going to grant a select access. I need to create a schema, and then I'm going to create a security function. And with a function, I'm stating that where salesperson equals username or username equals boss. And now I'm going to create a security policy and set that security function on the sales table, and I'm setting the state on, so it will actually turn this on. So just that quick, now it's live. So if I query the sales table as employee 1, I can only see employee 1's data. A query with employee 2, I'm only seeing employee 2. But what if I'm the boss? I'm not employee 1, I'm not employee 2, then I can see everything. Okay, so we implement this, and people immediately start complaining something's broke. How do you disable it? You just set the state off on that policy, and then if we go back and query as all 3 users, all 3 can see all data. So pretty straightforward. This, I mean, if you define your roles, you define your users, then you can prevent certain departments or certain people from seeing data that they really have no business looking at. And where I've seen this really come in handy is top tier. Maybe you have celebrities that are customers, you have employees that are customers, things like that that you need to protect access, and only a handful can see that data. This can allow you to start doing that. All right, so we've cleaned that up. What about always encrypted? So we want to encrypt data in the database. For this, I'm going to create a new database called always encrypted. And then I'm going to create a table, employee info. We're going to insert some data in there. And that's it. So if right now, nothing's encrypted, we can see we have 290 rows. We have a national ID, login ID, job title. So how do you enable always encrypted? I need to refresh the database. So we have this always encrypted. I'm going to open it up and expand my tables. But first, in security for this database, sorry, was one too far down. So always encrypted keys. You have column master keys and column encryption keys. Right now I don't have any because this database we just created. So I need to create a column master key. You can name it whatever you want. You get creative there. I'm just going to call mine test. And then I'll say, oh, actually, let's see, test. We'll call it test feb. I'll say okay. And then I need a column encryption key. So test feb 2. I'm going to encrypt this using which master key. I'll use the test feb and say okay. So that's it. You need a column master key and then a column encryption key. Now we want to encrypt information in the employee info table. So I'll right click, I'll go down to encrypt columns, choose next. In which column do you want to encrypt? We'll use the national ID. We'll pretend this is a social security number or some, I guess in another country that may be their version of a social security. What type of encryption? Do we want it deterministic or randomized? I'll go with deterministic. Which key do I want to use? If there were multiples that existed, you could pick and choose. So I'll go with test feb 2. I'll go next. Next, we're going to proceed now, or I could generate a PowerShell script to run later. Because it's only 290 rows, it's going to be pretty quick. If you're doing this while it's running, it's going to be locking that table. So you don't want to be trying to encrypt a table with a whole bunch of data that's being updated. Kind of best case is do this in a maintenance window. All right, so that was done. Now, I am currently connected with a secure connection. So if I were able to go in and look at the properties of my connection, so like here, we'll go ahead and do this. We'll connect to localhost. If I look in options, you have an always encrypted in the newer versions of SQL Server. Enable always encrypted. My current connection should already have this checked. So I'm going to make sure it's not checked here and say connect. So here I'm connected as myself to the CenturyOne connection, not the local host. So if I query, I should see the national ID. So let's make a connection using the local host. So we'll do a new query. So we can see here localhost.master versus over here with CenturyOne. So CenturyOne connection was encrypted. The localhost master is not. So for here, I should not see, it would help if I connected to the proper database. So now I'm not able to see the plain text data. I'm seeing encrypted data. So here I see the actual ID because I connected encrypted. Anyone that is an unauthorized, or not necessarily an unauthorized connection, but doesn't have the encryption key and isn't connecting using the always on encrypted would see this information. So that takes accessing SQL Server and protecting your data assets to a whole nother level, being able to column level encrypt in the storage engine that data. So sorry DBAs, who we like to think that we're almighty, he or they who control the data control the universe. And yes, you're still responsible for backup and restores and things, but that sensitive data that you're always worried about, oh, I've got to work on HR and I need to query to validate some stuff, but you don't need to, you're worried about seeing data that you shouldn't see and it being audited and getting in trouble, encrypt it. Now you can't see social security numbers and credit card numbers and salary information. Those things can be locked down. So who's going to manage the keys in your environment? You'll need to determine that. Typically, information security, they can maintain the key, or it could still be the DBA. So it's up to you all how you want to handle that. But knowing that only those with the encryption key can see this NAT ID should give an increased level of comfort and so make people feel more secure that you're doing everything that you can to protect that information. All right, that's kind of it for the demos. We talked about overall platform as a service, compliance, backups, the privacy and data protection, feature functionality that we have, threat and vulnerability protection. There was one other quick thing I just remembered that I wanted to show, and that was in the Azure portal. We were here. If I go to the overall dashboard and click on Security Center, I'd mentioned that kind of pane of glass, that window. So here I'm able to see overall policy and compliance. So where am I passing for PCI, for Azure CIS, different ones. So subscription coverage, my resource, security hygiene. So this was that vulnerability assessment information that I was getting from a networking perspective. If I enabled threat protection, which I should do that for this demo, then I'd be getting notifications there. And I think I have it on another subscription. But if I click into any one of these, and it's going to drill in so that I can see more information. So multi-factor should be enabled. Vulnerabilities on my SQL database should be remediated. Sensitive data, so that data classification, I'm getting dinged over on the other side. So I can click in there and scroll through and look at, okay, what's the remediation, or the threats, the remediation steps. So which databases, could kind of go into those, and then it's going to pop up and show me all the recommendations so I can approve, deny, implement, whatever the status may be. So lots of capabilities. We did some various demos. So I know we're coming up on time. My Twitter handle @tradney. Feel free to hit me up, send me a direct message. Tim@SQLskills.com. another way of reaching me. And
Awesome, thank you. I do have a couple questions if you have a few minutes.
Sure.
Okay. If anybody has a question that hasn't been asked already or that we don't cover, please, he's already mentioned, please go ahead and just email him. So his email address is on the screen right there, tim@sqlskills.com. All right, so I assume the data masking is based on the entire column and can't be filtered to only a set of records, or if the table has partitions to be only done for one or more partitions only?
Oh, great question. As far as I know, it is entire column, and depending on how you're partitioned. So if you're using like a partition function, so where it's still the same column, it's just spread around, I think that would affect the entire table. If you're using partitioning where it's hard-coded, you know, hey, this date range is over here, and it's truly separate tables, then it would be per table. But yeah, that's a great question. You know, could you use column level just on a certain subset? I'm not aware of that and haven't read anything around that it's, you know, because just when we step through it's per column. You know,
Okay.
they can follow up with me in an email, and I'll email the product team and ask if there's capability there, or if that's even a concept that they're considering. Because that would be neat that you could say, you know, greater than, less than, or between, to only mask for those.
Right. Okay, they're mentioning how would you, or can you, or how would you mask a variable length value and just show the first two and the last two characters? I think you showed it in the email example, but it went by so quickly that it didn't catch it.
Yeah, so if it's variable, yeah, great question. Again, follow up, and I'll do some quick little demos on my VM. I'll find some, or just create a column that's variable length and see if you can still choose the sequence. So I don't know if it would just start repeating, you know, so let's say my example, I think was 9 or 7, I think it was 2, 4, yes, 7. So let's say if there were 9, you know, with XYZ repeat, because I told it, you know, first two, last two, and then XYZ in the middle, how would it handle if there were more characters than that? So that's something I can easily test.
Awesome. And also this video will be uploaded, and you'll be able to go to the past.org into the Learning Center and search for the DBA Fundamentals Virtual Group as one of the tags or one of the filters on the left. And this will be the most recent if you go in the next week. So wait another day or two. It'll probably be listed by Wednesday or Thursday. So you'll be able to, you know, rewind and actually fast forward and then pause and that type of thing and see what he did in the presentation. All right. With Azure AD, can users of your application that are not members of your company be included? For example, if you're hosting a SaaS type application using an Azure web application and Azure database for each customer.
Okay, that one definitely needs to be emailed because there's some what ifs in there. But yes, you yeah, just follow up. There's ways to handle that.
All right, and let's see, just wanted to confirm that these are all available in the Azure Database Managed Instance and IaaS?
Yeah, so most. So your dynamic data masking, row-level security, TDE, always encrypted. That's SQL Server 2016, Azure SQL Database Managed Instance. Your threat protection stuff, Managed Instance, SQL DB, yes. Your VMs to a set. TDEs, yeah, it's been around since 2008. But did I show it? Your vulnerability assessment, that's Management Studio. For your IaaS, I don't think that the service has been opened up to other resources yet. But for the most part, yes.
Awesome. And last question, was there an option to remove encryption on the columns needed?
Yes, so it's not you've encrypted and then it's done forever. You can absolutely remove or decrypt and remove the always encrypted feature on that column.
Wonderful. Thank you so much, Tim. It is great to be able to say hi to someone that's, close enough to me. We're in the same time zone, so, one state away. So thank you very much for you and the SQL Skills team. Make sure you guys are aware of I think there's like 3 or 4 more presentations by the SQL Skills team within the next few months. So check us out, dbafun.org, and look at the list of presentations. They also get emailed out, and you can see everything that's coming up. Thank you.
Well, how can you say no to a group called DBA Fun?
Right? Exactly. All right, everybody, have a great rest of your day. Talk to you soon.
All right, cheers.